We're here with Malcolm Hoenlein, who is the Vice Chairman Emeritus of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. He's also the president of the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, president of Limud, and president of American Spirit. Malcolm, thank you once again for coming to JNS. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, we saw today a poll just came out which shows somewhat shockingly how as you move younger in age demographics across the United States, that 18 to 25-year-olds in particular think that Hamas's attack on October 7th was justified, and that even that the conflict should end with Hamas getting access to the entire state of Israel. You know, what do we learn from this poll?
It is shocking, but not surprising. We have seen this trend, and especially as in this age sector, below 18 or 18 to 25 even, that they are ignorant of history. The universities are filling them with woke culture, which is not fact-based, it's not truth-based. It's easy slogans, because when you test them and ask them, when you say river to the sea, which river, which sea, the vast majority do not know and can't identify it. Many couldn't even point to Palestine on a map, or what the areas that they were marching for. They had no clue of the history and how we got to the point we were at. The fact that they could dismiss the attack of October 7th, and that these people who demonstrate for Me Too, for everything, did not take even cognizance of the violence against women, the horrific actions that were taken. So it's a corruption of this generation. It's not something to be dismissed and think that they will grow out of it, because there's nothing for them to grow out of. They have no base of information and facts and things where they will rethink it. Some will, obviously, but for the most part, this is the orientation that they're adopting. And, you know, it's being fed by the universities, who are being fed by Qatar to the tune of $13 billion uncovered, and more billions that will be uncovered. No reporting, no registration, yet we have a direct correlation that is going to be revealed soon of increased anti-Semitism with increased foreign funding. So we have a variety of factors, including a woke faculty, administrations that don't care or support these radical ideas and ideologies, and the indifference of many of the donors and others, which is changing now.
Yeah, we're starting to see that some of the donors are demanding changes on the campus. However, you know, these phenomenon that are taking place on the campus have already started, and it started already 25 years ago. We started to see the Israeli Apartheid Week on the campuses, and the American Jewish community at that point largely said, you know, let's not make it a bigger issue than it is. Let's not confront it head on. Let's deal with it by introducing positive programming about Israel on the side, and letting the truth win out in this forum of ideas. But we see now, 25 years later, that the truth does not win out in the forum of ideas, and the university campuses are no longer a platform for the ideas that are pro-American, and certainly not ideas that are pro-Israel.
They are not a forum for ideas anymore, and therefore the thought that somehow this would self-correct was naive. And it is true of a good part of the Jewish community, and certainly of the donors and people who value the seats on the boards of universities, or their name on a building, or other attributes that came to them from their associations with major universities. I think that is changing now dramatically. You know, I was an early supporter of the Lawfare Project, which brought the lawsuits, the first lawsuits, and continues to now. Just announced a new one against Carnegie Mellon for their violation of the rights of Jewish students. They had San Francisco State University, which closed the first day of the trial and gave in much more than we've been asked for initially than was in the lawsuit. But the evidence against it was so damning that they realized there was no chance for them. And it's true against many universities, and there will be many more lawsuits which will bring the message home. But there's an infrastructure here that we're talking about, and it was evidenced when the three presidents of the universities testified in Congress, and Congresswoman Stefanik asked not tough questions. You know, one of the questions she asked that did not get coverage, but to me was very serious, was, do you recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state? All three said they recognize the right, but not as a Jewish state. Not one said as a Jewish state. And then, of course, the other comments where they couldn't make, there was no moral clarity about their positions regarding Israel, and even calling for genocide of Jews and declaring it as a violation of the standards. Now, all of a sudden, they're discovering that they had those standards and that they're reviewing it and they're all examining. And, of course, the president of Penn resigned and the chairman of the board. These are important messages. There are universities which are now reaching out to Jewish students, but you know that most of the major universities are imposing quotas on Jewish students. And we are finding the finest students from the best schools with the highest averages that were always a shoo-in to the best of the schools are being turned down across the board. If they're white, if they're Jewish, if they come from affluent areas, they don't have a chance. This is such a distortion. And in the meantime, we're bringing Muslim students in without limit. We're bringing foreign students in who are going to infiltrate into the American system and organize and become radical elements that destabilize America and our society. This is not to say we shouldn't allow students. There should be a better process for vetting. And you know that when a country gave money to a university, it came then with scholarships. So Qatar was able to send a lot of people here to the universities on scholarships because of their contributions to the various universities, Bahrain, many other countries as well.
So there's a number of questions that come up as you raise this. The first is, what is the future of the United States? Because we're already starting to see how the students who came up learning in these Qatari-funded Middle Eastern studies courses and programs, now they're teaching on the university campuses, they're teaching in high schools, and some of these graduates are running around the halls of Congress. And that's why you're starting to see decreasing support for Israel, even among the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So if the situation now on the campus is even worse than it was 20, 25 years ago, what will be the future of America? But then also the second question is, if Jewish students can't go on to these universities, A, get a good education because they're being locked out just from admissions, but B, that they're not permitted to have the safety and security that other students are guaranteed, and they're not permitted to openly support the state of Israel for risk of failing their courses and others. What will be the future of Jewish students living in the United States?
Those are really penetrating questions that need to be discussed more seriously than they are. I think one of the things that we'll see is that many Jewish students will tend to go to other schools. As I said, Catholic universities are reaching out now and saying we can provide a safe place for Jewish students to come. Yeshiva University doesn't have an empty seat in their classrooms. Brandeis has benefited from it. They will look more and more at what is a safe environment. And you're right, this is not just a threat against Jews and Zionists. We are only the tip of the iceberg. We're the stalking horse for America. Those who hate Israel hate it because of America. They don't hate America because of Israel. And those who hate Jews tend to hate God. And they resent who the Jews are, our history, our place. They want to deny us our past, our future, to deny us the right of self-determination that they fight for every people in the world except for the Jews. And we allowed this to go on for too long. And the denigration of Zionism as a term and somehow associating it with a negative force rather than a liberating force that created miracles in the Middle East and provided opportunities from Arabs and those who took advantage of it, and especially the 20% of Israel's population, live relatively good lives. Many of them are progressing and they are moving. You go into a hospital, half of the doctors are Arab doctors, are Muslim doctors. And the situation on our campuses was allowed to deteriorate because nobody wanted to confront the ivory tower. It was sacred, and then they would get blasted if they did. We see even those now, the squid in Congress, the 4 or 5 members, and we should remember overall 90% of Congress is staunchly pro-Israel, remains pro-Israel on both sides of the aisle. The American people remain pro-Israel, and even including that younger contingent, but without it, it's overwhelmingly pro-Israel. And we hope with age that some of them will change. But unless there is a radical change from the top down, these people will become the decision makers of the next generation.
Exactly. What should Israeli policymakers take from looking at these polls, especially when you see, yes, President Biden demonstrating overwhelming support for Israel during this conflict, but he's 81 years old. Many of the leaders of the Democratic Party and these caucuses, like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and others, they're over the age of 70. They're not going to be running and sitting in the positions that they're sitting in now in another 10 years from now. What should Israeli policymakers that are looking this poll understand about the future of Israel from the United States moving forward?
I don't think it's new, but it's a message that has to be reminded. You can't take America's support for Israel for granted, just as we should not take Israel for granted. And I think October 7th changed the mindset of a lot of Jews who were marginal in their activities and commitment to Israel, came to realize how important it is and how dangerous anti-Semitism is. People, executives of major corporations who wouldn't have taken our calls 5 years ago are calling us now for help. We see it, by the way, amongst professors, even more than students sometimes on universities. We're seeing it amongst the executives of companies, even more than the workers, telling us of the anti-Semitism they are experiencing. So number one, Israel has to be careful in crafting its message, in telling the truth, not just, dismissing it as, people often did. Shmum is important. I agree. It's a terrible place. And the nations is a terrible place. But we have to make the case as to why, and simply declaring it as anti-Israel is not enough. And the facts are on Israel's side. The question is, can we get it out? And too little attention is still paid to the Hasbara. I mean, there's no better person than Bibi in terms of explaining the case for Israel, and Ron Dermer, and he has many others who are articulate and know how to speak to an American audience. But we have to do it much more, and we have to build up the ties. We have wonderful support in the evangelical community and in conservative elements. We have to do much more to win others over, not at the expense of our friends, but in addition. And we have to be clear in our message. People don't know, should we be going after Qatar? On one hand, they play a role in Gaza, and Barnea, the head of the Mossad, goes and meets with the Prime Minister of Qatar. On the other hand, Qatar is funding a lot of the most hostile activities that we face.
And funding Hamas.
And funding Hamas. But that may be what they wanted, because they didn't want Gaza to collapse, which would have been a disaster also. And so what I'm saying is that this is such a complex area. There's so many competing issues that there has to be great clarity. Too much of the last year was spent on infighting and not enough attention paid to getting the message out and communicating strongly. And look at when you have the Sixth Fleet, the CENTCOM, and the support that we got from the two aircraft carriers, the joint exercises that have been going on between the United States and Israel over recent years, they get hardly any notice, but it's such a strong demonstration of the common interests, common goals that we have. And not enough is being done to make the case about Iran. And it's not just a nuclear case. Iran is behind all of these movements, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Syria militia, the Iraqi militias, all of which are firing on American troops and firing, of course, on Israel. We have not gotten that message across to the American people about the danger and who's the puppeteer behind all of it. And I would say to you that there are opportunities to bring the government of Iran down without nuclear weapons, because the people of Iran want to bring it down. And they are only looking for signals of support from the West, from America in particular. And when they see sanctions limited or money being passed, and then they say, we're putting our lives on the line. Where is the West? Where is Europe? Where is everybody else in terms of backing it? And they run the oil for Russia. They do so many things that we should. And the Houthis are an expression of Iran. And when they are targeting shipping, firing 16 missiles in a day against shipping in the Gulf and coming close to American ships, the lesson is that you blow them out of the water. And everybody says, you'll start a war. It's not true. It hasn't happened. When we stood up against the Iranians, they backed down because they looked for weakness and they exploited it.
You talked about the Houthis, and they've been interrupting maritime shipping, and people maybe think that they're just targeting Israeli-owned vessels or vessels that are approaching Israel, but the Red Sea actually feeds the Suez Canal as well. And now you have major shipping companies saying that they're no longer going to send their ships essentially through the canal because of the Houthis' attack.
And to the Bab el-Mandab, which is a very narrow waterway, so the Houthis have installed, rockets and things on and guns on the shore, which can hit any of these ships because it's a very narrow passageway. And 15% of the world's commerce goes through there every day. The oil shipments go through there. So companies have postponed or canceled for a few days their shipments. We can't allow it. There has to be an international cooperation between Britain and France, both of whom have now ships there,
And
have
they've
taken
had
out.
ships that have been attacked by drones.
And they took down the drones that came down, but ships of their country's origin. Many of the ships they're attacking are not going to Israel. They are holding one, and the idea that they could board with a helicopter and just take it over, that there was no resistance. We have Marines there now that are supposedly, can go back and have been put on the ships that are going through and could fight back, but the record is established. And this is such a bad signal to our allies. Well, what do the Saudis think? What does the UAE think if the West allows these pipsqueaks to do what they're doing? And the Saudis have mixed messages as well about it, because on the one hand, they want to keep them quiet because they were firing rockets at Saudi Arabia for a long time and are hostile and still have evil designs on them. But on the other hand, they want to keep it quiet. They want to try and assuage people.
It would seem as though there's been enough activity to warrant already a much sterner response, both
Absolutely.
to the Houthis and to Iran. Why do you think the international community is pausing or dithering over whether to take this attack back to the shores of Yemen, or potentially to be advancing a policy leading to the overthrow of the regime in Iran?
As many presidents have said to me when we've raised this issue over the last 25 years or more, trying to warn about what Iran was becoming, not just on the nuclear, its conventional weapons, its network of terrorist organizations which extend into South America. Iran is operating in at least 7-8 countries in South America. The Hezbollah has training camps there. They recently sent 2 ships through the Suez Canal, military ships that visited in Argentina and Venezuela. They are transferring weapons to Venezuela and getting oil and gold back. But they have always targeted South America over recent years because they can fight America from an hour off our southern coast and not from 8,000 miles away. And they show that they can operate even in American shipping lanes. So there is a reluctance to stand up to it. And what terrorists do, the way they operate is that they probe. And where they find softness and weakness, they will press ahead. If they find resistance, they back up, and then they come back again. When they find that they are challenged, they melt in front of it. The Houthis could be taken care of very easily by the West. And Yemen should be stabilized. Yemen is the poorest country in the world. It's a disaster area completely. And the Houthis have exploited what the government there did and the failure in services and stuff, but they're not providing services. They're exploiting it for their own purpose and ideological goals. Iran, we could, as I said, and I speak to people in Iran on a regular basis, the dissident movements continue, the demonstrations continue. We did not do enough to support the women when they were putting their lives on the line, demonstrating day after day after day throughout the country. When they attacked us in Iraq and in Syria, American troops came under 75 attacks. We responded 4 times, and we hit warehouses. Maybe we hit weapon depots. But the fact is that is a weak response, and that sends the wrong message. And they will continue to expand their activities. It is not a power. It's half the country is in a drought. The economic conditions are terrible. The people are ready to rebel against this regime. In the soccer games, they yell, "We will not die for Gaza. We will not die for Hezbollah. We will die for Iran." Meaning, and they are supportive of Israel. And I will tell you that if the government of Iran falls, I predict that Iran, the people of Iran, will become the best allies of Israel. And they demonstrated whenever Netanyahu sent a message in Farsi or when there were broadcasts in Farsi, they had huge audiences in Iran. I'm not going to say it's an instant conversion, but the people themselves are not where the leadership is. And we have opportunities, but we've blown it. When the Green Revolution took place, when Clinton, Hillary Clinton, when Colin Powell, both of them said, we don't get involved in internal feuds. People said, we're putting our lives on the line, and you tell us we don't get involved in family feuds. We set back those movements. And what did they want from us? They didn't want machine guns. They wanted fax machines. They wanted support. They wanted, bus drivers wanted to strike for 2 months. And I approached the FFL-CIO and I said, where are you? You demonstrate for the democratic movements around the world. Here you have a very important one. And they did issue a good statement then. But we have let them down. We've let the people of Iran down repeatedly. And in the meantime, we sent them so many billions of dollars in cash. which is the fuel of terrorism.
It seems as though the United States has had a policy of trying to counterbalance Israel with other players in the region locally, to counterbalance Israel and Palestinians, more regionally to counter Israel as a strong power on the one hand with Iran on the other hand. October 7th has been a moment where Israelis have really woken up and recognized that the paradigm needs to change. And yet many people are just looking at this conflict as just another extended round of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yet you're saying clearly here that this is really a war between Israel and Iran and its terror proxies. Israel said that if the international community doesn't deal with the Houthis, that it knows what to do. It's prepared to deal with it. Do you see this conflict expanding where Israel will soon take on Hezbollah, will soon take on the Houthis, and potentially even take on Iran and its nuclear infrastructure itself?
So on your first point, I don't know that they thought through a process, a thoughtful policy of balancing powers. I don't think that they have thought through long-term policies at all in the region. And if anything, it was Saudi Arabia versus Iran. And as you know now, because of what they perceived the weakness in the United States, Western policy, the placement of the aircraft carriers, I think, was the first real demonstration of American commitment and sent a very positive message. But in the meantime, the Saudis look at it and say, hey, listen, we might, if they're sending them billions of dollars, we might as well, cover our bases by at least having diplomatic relations with Iran. They hate Iran as much as ever. They know that what Iran's goal is to overtake them and to take away the holy places. And they consider that the Saudis infidels in this regard. So I don't think that there is necessarily a balance of power motivation behind this. I do think that the reason we haven't taken on Iran is people are, talk about a world war. They talk about what will strike back. Iran can't conduct a world war. The only allies it has today who are formidable are Russia and China. And with the right attack, China and Russia are not going to risk. And Russia is not going to open a second front, even if they supply weapons and they sell planes and other things to, and Iran sells them drones and other equipment which they're using against the people in the Ukraine. If we stood up to them, like we did when they started harassing our ships in the Gulf and we fired on them, they backed off right away. When they took hostages, American hostages, British hostages, and they mocked them, marched them in the streets and stuff, that was a sign. It was a humiliation of the West to say, look what we can do to them. And we have to respond in kind to them. It's not going to be pleasant, but I don't believe a nuclear war result. I don't think Iran can today conduct a nuclear war. I don't think China or Russia will risk devastation for Iran. They will benefit from it because they will try to exploit then the oil prices and everything else to their benefit. But it has to be a concerted effort, most of all helping the people in Iran take over their own government and determine their own future, but also not allow them to subvert all of the regimes in the region, to continue to ship weapons, to continue to dictate the policy. Why were there meetings in Lebanon between Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas in the weeks before October 7th? And I raised this on my radio shows and said something's cooking. They're meeting in Lebanon. People see it. They're coordinating something. This is not just haphazard. And clearly, Iran was involved in the attacks of October 7th in terms of planning, in terms of support for them, even if not giving a green light for that particular day, although I think they knew about it and were involved. And the same thing that Hezbollah had identical plans for the north. We know where it's coming from, and we know what the coordination is, and the weapons that they're shooting at us were developed with the help of engineers from Iran in Gaza, in Lebanon.
We see that Israel really has been pursuing dual tracks of transforming the Middle East. On the one hand, normalizing with moderate Arab neighbors that don't see any more the benefit of this Arab-Israeli conflict, and also tackling the sources of instability and aggression in the region, which is Iran and its terror proxies. Now with their attack on Hamas, there's a low-level war between Israel and Hezbollah brewing in the north with southern Lebanon, and Israel's being hit by the Houthis from further to the south. Do you think that Israel's going to succeed to A, defeat Hamas, B, to tackle these other proxies, and C, to truly transform the Middle East into what many hope that this region could blossom into?
Israel must defeat Hamas. It's not a choice anymore. All of the countries that Israel established relations with, Saudi Arabia, not formal, but informal, but UAE formal, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, they're all looking to see what Israel will do. If we want to see the Abraham Accord prosper and move ahead after this war ends, which I believe it will, then Israel must be allowed to finish off Hezbollah. I can tell you that at the COP28 meeting, many Arab leaders told people, decimate them. Don't listen to what we say, just decimate them. You have to finish them. This is the battle for all of us. And the same thing was true in the war in Lebanon. How many expressed to me their consternation that Israel wasn't allowed to finish off Hezbollah at the time. And then we would not be facing 150,000 missiles on Israel's northern border and an infrastructure and tunnels the same way that you have in Gaza, 500 miles of tunnels. How come people don't say, who paid for it? Well, how come they were able to divert all this money to build all the infrastructure? It's a very sophisticated infrastructure. That all of a sudden, that avoids any discussion. The United Nations doesn't care about it, doesn't care about what they do to their own people, let alone what they've done to Israelis, and continue just the one-sided condemnations. So all of those give a green light to the bad forces to say, you will get away with it. You can do it. You pay a price, but they don't care about human life. They value death. They extol death. We extol life. And so I think the outcome must be the decimation and the elimination of Hamas. Not every person in Gaza, God forbid. The innocent people, the citizens should be able to rebuild, and we hope that but Israel will have to retain some sort of a control to make sure that the transition period is good until a government is elected that will really take responsibility, build the economy. The many Arab countries, I'm sure, will help facilitate, will give assistance to it. But it could be Singapore. It could be a Hong Kong. It could be a major center. It has beautiful beaches. It had opportunities. And they what did they do? They destroyed the greenhouses. They destroyed the synagogue, the buildings that were left from Gush Katif. All of the things. They destroyed everything. And the blame is not on Israel. Israel gave them every opportunity. It withdrew completely, yet we talk about an occupation. So, number one, the facts have to be clear. Number two, we have to make sure that Israel's given the latitude to finish the job and do it right. Number three, if necessary, to take care of pushing Hezbollah back past the Litani River as UN Resolution 1701 demands. And because we're relaxing and enforcing that and allowing them to creep up more and more and more until they are on Israel's border, and with power installations and observation posts, and you see the UNIFIL troops there did nothing to stop them. I mean, it's a paper tiger. So the United Nations repeatedly was asked to act against it and inconsistent with Resolution 1701. They did not. And now we have, tens and tens of thousands of troops, much more than exist in Gaza, a much more formidable enemy. And they have to be pushed back at least to the Litani so that the people can come back to the north and live in relative security.
An Israeli victory of the type that you're discussing, just to bring this all back around, what does that type of victory do to the public opinion for Israel in the United States versus a situation in which Israel maybe doesn't have that type of overall victory? What's on the line in terms of just the overall support for Israel around the world?
The haters will hate no matter what. Israel can self-sacrifice, can do whatever it wants. They will still criticize Israel. Israel demonstrating restraint does not win the support of anybody. It only causes Jewish victims. I think that the people who count will recognize it. Members of Congress, others, all say to us that they understand what Israel's up against. Nobody likes to see the pictures and the numbers every day coming out of how many Gazans have been killed and how many people, and they say were children, and think that without any evidence that those numbers are true or accurate in any way.
Including Israelis don't like those images.
I'm saying that nobody likes to see that, and we haven't seen the images because nobody has demonstrated its truth, and it's a Hamas-run agency. But whatever, civilians are being killed. Nobody wants to see that. But who's responsible? It's not Israel. Israel didn't put the rockets and use the people as human shields. They didn't put them in the mosques and in the schools and in the hospitals. And every day we find more the tunnels and everything that's in every one of these institutions. So the blame goes on Hamas for what exists and for what is happening. And if the leaders want to really stop this, let them surrender, let him turn over all the weapons and those responsible for October 7th, and the fighting will end. But we know full well that if the Israelis lay down, if the Arabs lay down their arms in Gaza, that'll be it.
There'll be peace.
But if Israel lays down their arms, there's no Israel. So it is not an equation of equal sides and responsibility. Israel did not want this war. Maybe acted with too much restraint. They had acted earlier and done what they did in the West Bank, rooting out a lot of the Hamas infrastructure, which is why I think you've had more quiet in Judea and Samaria than you would have had otherwise, because they did do those raids, destroyed some of the factories producing weapons, arrested hundreds of Hamas members, and have since arrested many more. And I think they were surprised by how big the infrastructure of Hamas is in the West Bank. Had we done that maybe in Gaza, we would have had a different story and avoided October 7th, which is something for the day after, not now. Right now, everybody should be unified and standing behind Israel to do what it has to do, and we have to make sure it gets the resources to do it.
You talk about unifying in the months and maybe years leading up to October 7th. We saw a lot of divisiveness within the Jewish community, both here in Israel, a lot of political divisiveness over the continued rule of Benjamin Netanyahu, judicial reforms, but we also saw a growing rift between the American Jewish community and the state of Israel, with many members of the Jewish communal leadership being much more hypercritical of the elected government of the state of Israel. October 7th seems to have brought Israelis together, and also seems to have informed American Jewry that they need to actually come back from the criticism and to support Israel. We've seen over $1 billion raised so far from the American Jewish community to support the war efforts. Tell me, what is the strength, the need for Jewish unity, and do you think it can continue after the hostilities end here?
So I do think October 7th was a watershed in Jewish history, Israel's history of the diaspora Jewry. I think it brought a new recognition to them of Israel's vulnerability and of the reality of the enemy we are facing at home and abroad, that communities in America all of a sudden realized the hatred that we kept telling them existed on our campuses, but what happened in their communities, the acts of vandalism, the attacks on individuals, the 500, 600% increase in anti-Semitic attacks, the kind of language and the failure of many to speak out against it, and people that they had long counted on who were approached to stand with Israel against Hamas, against a terrorist entity that carried out one of the worst outrages in history. And they didn't do it. They wouldn't speak up. So for many people, there's a new reality. And many are turning to Israel now because they realize that Israel is the safe haven, is still the safe place, regardless of the dangers that it faces. I think it's true for many Europeans and true for many Americans. And most of all, I think they're turning back to the community, because when people feel under assault, they look to a community, to others, for comfort, for protection, and I think also for many young people, it was a reawakening. It started to put things into context. And they're talking about their future. And when in their own campuses they can't feel secure, when they can't leave their dorms, when they get locked in a library, when they saw that they were not getting support from their roommates and their friends, let alone from the administrations, this has a profound impact and will have a long-term impact, just as October 7th will have a long-term impact on the psyche of the people in the South and the North and of all of Israel. So I think that the relationship can be stronger. We have to build it, take advantage of this opportunity to open more channels of communications and support. People are pouring out every resource they have to go to Israel. You see rabbis coming with 30, 40 duffel bags for the soldiers. You see every night the Haredim serving meals to 1,000 soldiers at a base all over, every night, all over. I think that a lot of the barriers of the last year are breaking down. It doesn't mean they won't come back, and it doesn't mean that divisions won't be there. But I think people are looking at each other in a different way, and the commonality of interest, and that seeing that the soldiers who are dying, you have many Haredi, many Orthodox and secular soldiers dying together. Nobody makes a distinction. The enemy certainly doesn't. So I'm hopeful, because the one precondition that was set for every miracle that happened to the Jewish people throughout our history was Achdut, Jewish unity. We saw it destroyed in the past year, torn apart, fighting demonstrations. To me, the remarkable part was that they didn't burn flags. They all carried flags. And demonstrated their commitment to Israel despite the fact that they were disagreeing and criticizing the government, which is perfectly legitimate to do, and what in democracies we cherish the value the right of people to protest and to differ with their governments. Sometimes it went to extremes, and it posed the danger of really ripping people apart, and people made statements, public statements that were irresponsible, both elected officials and the businessmen threatening to leave, telling of destroying Israel's destruction. That's fodder to our enemy. And many of them, I think, in Hezbollah and in Hamas, believed that Israel was weakened, that the soldiers would not show up. And yet 140% responded to the call-up, meaning of 100% call-up, 140% came. And they were so devoted. You see the intensity, and I visited them down at their bases in the south. They're unbelievable. And even after 2 months, the fervor hasn't diminished. They know what they're there for. They have a sense of mission and common goal and aspiration for what they have to do. So I'm optimistic that out of this, there will be changes. There has to be changes. There will be investigations about how all this happened and who was responsible. But I think that we'll emerge with a stronger Israel.
Malcolm Hoenlein, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure.